Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Sig Electronic Optics Romeo 1 Pro with the shroud. I've been getting questions about the Romeo 1 Pro. Was I going to do a Romeo 1 Pro? Was I going to do an evaluation of the Romeo Pro for some time? Secret is, not every evaluation gets a video. So I've actually checked it out previous, but I wanted to do a video on my testing of the Romeo 1 Pro with the shroud because I get a lot of questions that not everybody's going to check out the white paper, and reading a line of data isn't quite the same as seeing a video and getting my feelings on it, especially for those of you who are familiar with and trust my testing process, my testing procedure. The main reason I kind of got into this, at least for video purposes, is I wanted to check out the latest iteration of SIG's X-Carry and the P320 handgun. I see P320s more and more in my classes, and I was curious on, of course I'd shot them before, but I've never owned one. So I wanted to check one out. And it comes with the Romeo 1 Pro. However, the X-Series I got did not come with the shroud, so I had to purchase that separately, throw it on the optic, and then go through my normal 2,000 round testing procedure. Now, recently there has been a departure in the order of things as far as testing goes. I used to, as soon as zeroing was complete, immediately do a 500 round burn down. I don't do that anymore. The burn down has been moved forward 500 rounds. The reason for that is if the optic were to break on the first drop test after the 500 round burn down, I would not have a lot of information to share with you about how I felt about the optic's performance. So I moved the burn down. So now I do the zero and I do 500 rounds of just evaluation, normal testing, using the optic in my normal practice and my normal shooting to see and to get a feel for it. Burn down comes after that. So once I got the optic mounted, I went ahead and zeroed it up, which was giving me a great impression about the gun as well, but that's not the purpose of this video. One thing I do love about SIG red dot sights is the glass clarity is unrivaled. There is not a red dot currently that I have evaluated that has the same clarity of true color, no aberration, no distortion through the lens as SIG. And they also have really good LEDs. The dot is very true to size. It doesn't have any unnecessary scatter or blooming. And when transitioning from target to target, the refresh rate is fantastic, meaning I don't see any segmentation of the red dot when rapidly adjusting my point of aim, which some people, that's not a big deal. For me, it is. I want my dot to stay my dot. I don't want my dot to become a blinking little line until I settle on my next point of aim. Not something I want, and to me, that's a telltale sign of a bad, cheap LED emitter. Same thing with a laser pointer. Cheap LED laser pointers segment the line when you move them really fast. Good lasers like out of a mall or PEC 15, solid lightsaber-esque type laser, which is what you want. So for the first 500 rounds, getting to know the Romeo 1 Pro, which is a slight, I shouldn't say slight, it is a next generation improvement on the Romeo 1, which I did a video on a couple years ago. Now the Romeo 1 had durability issues, and getting into this and even adding that protective shroud, which I think is a good idea even if the optic is already known to be durable, next extra layer of protection is always a good thing, right? Getting into it, was it going to have any significant improvements over my time spent with the Romeo 1? The Romeo 1 Pro is available in a 3 MOA or a 6 MOA dot size with, manual dot adjustments, which is exactly what you want. It's got 12 settings, 10 daytime, 2 night vision with a quoted runtime of 20,000 hours, which is going to give you a year plus of battery life for your carry optic. It does have what they call MOTAC, which is Motion Activated Illumination System, so when the optic isn't being used or carried, it's sitting in the safe or on the nightstand or wherever you keep your handgun when you're not carrying it around, it optic turns down to help conserve battery life, which is a good thing, because usually the cleaner and the clearer a lens is, the less the battery life, because they're not adding a notch filter that's deep or dark enough, if you will, so that red dot has to project brighter for you to be able to see it in those lighting conditions, which cuts down on battery life. So having a motion sense technology is always a smart move for something like that. It's something some people don't trust. I've never personally picked up a gun fast enough to catch the optic before it turned on, to include draw strokes. So I think it's a great feature for optics that are able to do it reliably, and in my experience using SIG Optics, their motion tack is excellent. So getting acquainted with the Romeo 1 Pro during the 500 rounds, I didn't experience any issues whatsoever. Their point LED emitter is excellent, and I bring that up because in some optics, depending on where you're aiming and what lighting conditions you're in, you can have the sun or headlights or downrange lights or other photonic barriers cause your lens, or I should say your LED, to kind of backscatter and project a halo or an outline of the electronic signature or something like that. This is not something I experienced on the Romeo 1 or the Romeo 1 Pro. Lens clarity is great, and even though there's not this, you know, notch filter and other lens coatings, ruby coatings and anti-light transmission coatings, everything like that, I'm not getting that backsplash or that backscatter depending on which lighting condition I'm facing the optic into. So after that first 500 rounds, we got to our first drop test. If you're not familiar with the drop test, the reason I do it is to give me a somewhat consistent methodology for testing the optic taking some kind of rapid shock. Not necessarily because I believe that people are going to drop their guns, but a hard shock to the optic is something good to test, because handguns can encounter a little bit more use and abuse than rifles, especially in a law enforcement purpose. If this gun is in a holster and the officer's fighting with a suspect or something like that, he could get hip checked into a wall or a Jersey barrier or the side of a patrol car or something like that, and that can break the optic. Why? How do I know that? Because I have students who've come through my red dot instructor class who then later went on back to their police departments or whatever, and they've reported back to me, hey, X brand optic broke when we did X, and it had nothing to do with dropping the optic. So it's just a way for me to test it, and there's a correlation there between what optics make it through the drop tests and what optics don't, with what optics I see fail in the field with my students reporting back to me. So there's something useful there. But again, this is just my standard. It's not necessarily the standard. Drop test is done from shoulder height on a hard surface, usually concrete or paving stone, depending on which range I happen to be using that week. So I went ahead and did my first drop test. After that first drop, I already had lens breakage, but the SIG lens does break in a good way. And you may be scratching your head like, what does that mean? Well, some lenses, when you break them, become completely opaque and you can't see through them based on the lens materials that they use, the composition lens, construction lens, whatever. This is not that case. So in this situation, had the optic taken a significant spill, you'd still be able to see through it, you'd still be able to use the optic, which is a good thing. If a lens is going to break, this is the way we want it to break. We want them not to break, but if they are going to break, this is the way it happens. Now after that, I got into the 500 round burn down. Of course, the whole purpose of the 500 round burn down is to see if that accelerated rate of fire is going to cause any issues with the optic that I wouldn't otherwise notice, usually heat related or, you know, just maybe recoil, but recoil is recoil. Shooting 500 rounds in a short period of time versus a much longer period of time can show issues that you wouldn't otherwise notice. Burn down did not affect zero, but it is bringing us to our next drop test. But I didn't notice any issues whatsoever during the burn down, such as flickering, fading, or any strange behavior of the reticle or the red dot itself, which brought us to our next drop test. Well, that was that. Sadly, drop test number 2 was the end of the road for the Romeo 1 Pro with the shroud. The lens had a complete failure, breakage, and most of the lens departed the shroud body itself. Interesting thing though, and this is something I like to bring up when necessary, is there was enough glass left in the optic body window itself that I could still use by introducing a little bit of alignment parallax in my dot placement on the glass. I could still project and see my dot and actually still shoot a steel plate at 100 yards with it, which is pretty cool. But at that point, I'm digging so deep in the lens with the dot, I might as well just use iron sights anyway. But just for your own personal information, if there's glass left in a lens when it breaks, it's usable. And even if you have to introduce a little bit of parallax, you can still shoot accurately, even out to approaching unrealistic handgun distances. But that was it. It even with the shroud, it only made it 1,000 rounds. Now, this is just my testing procedure. Some people may be like, well, that's really harsh, or I'd never use that optic. Here's the thing. I would not recommend this optic for duty carry in a duty capacity in a non-concealed duty holster, meaning patrol, uniform duty, SWAT duty, something like that. However, for concealed carry, I don't really see an issue with it. And this is where some people use my duty testing procedure as the holy grail guidelines for any situation, and that's not the case. If you don't carry in this manner, then you don't necessarily have to look for. And I understand people are like, well, I want something that meets the ultimate standard, and I totally get that. I'm right there with you. However, for concealed carry, I don't think there's anything wrong with this optic at all, especially with the benefits that you do get from it. And I'm not trying to talk the optic up. It really is the cleanest lens out there. It really does have a great point LED emitter, which gives you a true to size dot, not even depending on brightness setting. You don't get a ridiculous amount of bloom or aberration if you go too high on your brightness settings or you're too low in certain lighting conditions. It is a clean sight picture, a very clean sight picture, almost to the point, and especially with the thinness of the shroud, which is a good and a bad thing, that if you project out and you're just shooting focused like you should be, you might not even notice you are looking through a red dot. It might just be like, there's a red dot magically floating in front of my face, which puts these bullets where I want them to go, which is kind of the idea behind red dots. We want them to be unobtrusive and unnoticeable as possible when we're using them. The Romeo 1 Pro is an improvement on the Romeo 1. The shroud definitely helped. I honestly believe without that shroud, the lens may have completely broken on the first drop. Of course, I'll be picking this optic up again and I'll be testing again. Unfortunately, this video is just kind of showing you what I already experienced with stuff I didn't bother to film. This is not my first time evaluating the Romeo 1 Pro with the shroud. It's just the first time doing a video on it, but I had enough questions, and because I was already doing a video on that particular model of gun, the P320 X Series full size, that I wanted to check out for video purposes, and it comes with an optic, so I might as well throw it on there, but this video isn't about the gun, it's about the optic. Because I don't just test an optic once and then be like, pass, fail. I'm going to test the same brand of optic multiple times, especially if I have one that doesn't make it through the first X amount of rounds. It's something I want to see, get a bigger sample size. But I don't do a video on everything because YouTube's a hobby. It's not my main job and not my main business. But like I said, for concealed carry, sure, excellent. For plainclothes duty, detective or something like that, yeah, great. So just make sure you put the shroud on just for a little bit of extra protection, because the shroud also helps with those one-handed manipulations that we do for malfunction clearances and reloading when shooting one-handed, which is something that we've always practiced with handguns, being able to run the gun if you only have one hand available. So it only makes sense that you'd use the optic window to manipulate the gun in those situations, because it's a much larger ledge purchase than trying to use your rear sight or something like that. So that's kind of my feelings on the Romeo 1 Pro. I honestly believe that SIG is going to, improve upon this, and they have a new generation of optic coming soon, which I expect to be very durable. Not only is it going to give us the great clarity that I've come to expect from SIG Optics, but it's going to give us a, hopefully, ridiculous amount of durability, but I'm reserving judgment, of course, on that until I actually get one and start testing it. So this is kind of just a video rundown on the Romeo 1 Pro with the shroud for those of you who are asking. I'm Eric Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.